On what seemed like an ordinary flight from San Francisco to New York, the first-class cabin would become the stage for a life-changing lesson in humility and the perils of making assumptions based on appearances. Jessica Parker, an experienced flight attendant, had spent more than a decade perfecting her role in the high-end service of first class. She was known for her attention to detail and her ability to read passengers, but on this particular day, she was about to learn that even the most seasoned professionals could make critical mistakes when they let judgment cloud their perception. The flight to New York was routine for Jessica, who had spent years working the glamorous section of the cabin. At 42, she was proud of her position as a senior flight attendant. The first-class section was her domain, and she had come to expect nothing short of perfection from her passengers. She was meticulous in ensuring every detail was flawless, from the polished leather seats to the crystal-clear glasses and the perfectly arranged amenities. As passengers began boarding, Jessica surveyed her surroundings with the practiced eye of someone who understood the subtleties of high-end service. The flight's departure from San Francisco International Airport was bathed in the soft golden glow of the morning sun as Jessica adjusted her crisp uniform and moved through the cabin. She greeted her younger colleague Emily, who had been with the airline for only 2 years. Jessica took her role as a mentor seriously, and she felt responsible for imparting the finer details of the first-class experience to her less seasoned co-workers. "Morning, Emily," Jessica said as she passed her. "Is everything set for boarding?" Emily nodded, glancing around nervously. "Yes, all good to go." Jessica straightened a magazine on a seat, looking up with a knowing smile. "Remember, first class isn't just about offering exceptional service. It's about creating an image. Our passengers are paying for exclusivity, and we have to meet those expectations." As the first passengers began to trickle into the cabin, Jessica assumed her usual position at the entrance, offering the practiced, welcoming smile she had perfected over the years. She watched as her usual clientele filed in. Businessmen in sharp suits, women draped in designer outfits, and even a celebrity who was instantly recognizable. It was a scene she had grown accustomed to, with passengers whose wardrobes and lifestyles often surpassed her own earnings in a single month. The wealth and glamour were almost tangible, setting the tone for the exclusive space she was entrusted with. But then, Jessica's gaze fell on a man who did not belong. His attire was completely out of place, simple jeans and a plain black t-shirt, carrying only a basic laptop bag. There were no designer accessories, no luxury watch, and certainly no high-end shoes or briefcase. He didn't fit the mold of the typical first-class passenger. "Excuse me," Jessica whispered to Emily. "Did you verify his boarding pass?" Emily glanced over and nodded. "Yes, everything is in order. He's in 2A. Jessica furrowed her brow. In all her years as a flight attendant, she had developed an intuition for who belonged in first class. The man in 2A did not fit the profile. His modest attire and reserved demeanor seemed so at odds with the opulence that surrounded him. As more passengers boarded, the contrast only became more stark. The man in 2A sat quietly, his laptop bag placed underneath his seat, while around him the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the rustle of tailored suits. Jessica watched him closely, her discomfort growing. The man seemed completely indifferent to his surroundings, quietly typing away on a laptop that wasn't even the latest model. He didn't request pre-flight champagne, didn't make any special demands, and didn't seem bothered by the cabin's temperature. He simply sat, working. Something was off. Jessica muttered under her breath, checking the manifest again. The name listed for 2A was Sundar Pichai, but she didn't recognize it. With each passing moment, her suspicion deepened. She couldn't reconcile the man's appearance with his seat in first class. Then a group of young tech executives boarded, chatting animatedly. As they passed row 2, one of them stopped short, his eyes widening in recognition. Before he could approach the man, his colleague ushered him along. The tech executives continued to glance back at 2A, their whispers growing more excited as they took their seats. Yet the man remained engrossed in his work, oblivious to the attention he was garnering. Jessica's suspicions only grew. With the final boarding call echoing through the cabin, she decided to investigate. As a senior flight attendant, it was her responsibility to ensure that the standards of first class were upheld. Jessica's encounter with a quiet man in seat 2A would soon lead to a humbling lesson. Confident in her years of experience, she assumed he didn't belong in first class due to his unassuming demeanor and modest attire. As the flight continued, her suspicions grew, especially when tech executives whispered about him. She even questioned him about his boarding pass, noting his plain clothing and lack of interest in the luxuries around him. However, her assumptions were shattered when one of the tech executives revealed the truth. The man in 2A was Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google. Jessica, embarrassed and shaken, realized she had misjudged him. The tech executive apologized on behalf of the passengers, revealing that Sundar was the keynote speaker at an upcoming conference. The cabin erupted in murmurs as passengers who hadn't recognized him began pulling out their phones to verify the revelation. The businessman across the aisle shook his head, having tried to warn Jessica earlier. Emily, the young attendant, dropped the napkin she had been holding, her face reddening with second-hand embarrassment. Sundar Pichai, for his part, remained unfazed. His dignified composure never wavered. He raised his hand slightly, attempting to calm the situation. "It's really not necessary," he said gently. "Everyone makes mistakes. Let's not escalate this." However, a famous actress seated in the front row couldn't hold back. "But Mr. Pichai, she humiliated you in front of all of us," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with indignation. Sundar shook his head, his calmness radiating. "No one is humiliated unless they choose to be," he replied softly. "This can be a learning moment for all of us, not just about judging people by their appearance, but about showing grace and understanding." When Jessica returned to the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. The judgment in the air was not directed at Sundar Pichai anymore, but at her. Every eye followed her as she walked down the aisle, her once confident stride faltering with each step. Emily, trying to comfort her, whispered it could have happened to anyone. But deep down, they both knew the truth. Jessica's prejudice and assumptions had led to this painful moment. Meanwhile, the tech executives began sharing stories about Sundar's humble leadership style and the transformative impact he had made on the tech industry. One passenger, in an almost reverent tone, shared, "Did you know he grew up in a 2-room apartment in India? His story is incredible." Each story, each revelation, felt like a blow to Jessica's already battered ego. Her mistake was not just about a misjudgment of a single passenger. It was a reflection of her own biases and the way she had allowed appearances to cloud her understanding of who someone truly was. Jessica stood in the galley, her impeccable uniform now feeling like an ill-fitting costume. Through the curtain, she saw Sundar return to his work as if nothing had transpired, his calm dedication making her feel even more remorseful. The captain's final words echoed in her mind, "Fix this, Jessica, and learn from it." But how could she rectify something so grave when she had just insulted one of the world's most influential and humble CEOs? The answer would come from the very person she had wronged, altering her perspective forever. After spending an hour hiding in the galley, Jessica realized that she had to confront her mistake. With trembling hands, she stepped back out. As she walked toward seat 2A, the eyes of other passengers followed her every move, some shaking their heads in disapproval. "Mr. Pichai," she began softly, her voice faltering, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Sundar looked up from his laptop, offering a gentle smile. "Of course," he replied, closing his computer. His kind response only deepened Jessica's regret. I am deeply sorry for my behavior," she stammered, struggling to find the right words. "I was completely wrong to judge you based on your appearance." Sundar's response took everyone by surprise. "You know, when I was younger, I couldn't afford expensive clothes," he began, his voice warm and thoughtful. "Even now, as CEO, I believe comfort and simplicity matter more than displaying wealth. Your reaction today is something I've encountered many times in my life." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes. "That makes it even worse, sir." Sundar shook his head gently. "No, Jessica. It makes it a perfect learning opportunity." He subtly gestured around the cabin. "What do you see?" Jessica glanced around at the other passengers, people dressed in expensive attire and designer brands. What do those things say about their characters, their abilities, their worth as human beings. The question struck Jessica profoundly. She had spent 15 years judging people based solely on superficial details. A young tech executive who had been listening spoke up. Mr. Pichai leads meetings worth billions in just a t-shirt and jeans. During a flight, Jessica, a flight attendant, judged Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, for wearing simple clothes. Other passengers shared their experiences of being judged based on appearances, and Sundar explained that true class isn't about what you wear, but how you treat others. He emphasized that at Google, innovation and character are valued, not attire. Jessica, who had once thought her uniform represented high standards, realized she had been shallow in her judgments. Sundar gave her a book on leadership, and she vowed to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance. The incident became a powerful lesson in leadership, and Jessica shared her story in a training session that went viral, inspiring others to rethink their biases. The airline used the situation to create a new training program on eliminating bias. Jessica later spoke at a diversity conference hosted by Google, where she shared how she had learned that true luxury is about dignity, not appearance. The experience led to significant changes, both in her perspective and within the airline's customer service approach, reminding everyone that respect matters more than outward appearances. The story of the flight attendant and the Google CEO transcended a viral moment. It became a lasting reminder that in a world quick to judge by appearances, the most powerful lessons often emerge from our biggest mistakes.